What do you think about Donald Trump getting the Nobel Peace Prize?
I don't think there's a great chance that he will get the prize. An independent Palestine, which is a good partner in the area, how we can rebuild Gaza after the terrible, terrible suffering that's been going on there. For India specifically, there is a need to have two thoughts at the same time. On the one hand, pride in India, but at the same time, to be a humble representative in the world.
Welcome to the Global Ring, an interview series which will bring in experts from around the world to talk about India's position in the world, the economy, and the way forward. Today we have with us Dr. Henrik Syse, the former Vice Chair of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, the former Head of Corporate Governance at the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, a philosopher, researcher, and most of all, a dear friend. Henrik, welcome to the Global Ring.
So glad to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
So, Henrik, let's just jump straight into it. What do you think about Donald Trump getting the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, he hasn't gotten it yet. It seems he thinks that he got it because the previous laureate, or the current laureate, gave her medal to him. But that's not the prize. And actually, that's not that unusual. Many laureates through the years have donated either their medal or their diploma to some institution. So, it's not as big a deal as it sounds. I'm very careful, of course, in saying what the Nobel Committee should do. I was on the committee for a full term of 6 years, and I know how difficult it is to find the right laureate. But if I am to be honest with you, and I've learned that that's a good thing, to be honest with other people, I don't think there's a great chance that he will get the prize, because it's not only about what you achieve, and of course we can discuss whether he has achieved anything that really has to do with peace, but let's leave that aside. It's also about the sort of person you are, the way in which you deal with other people, the way in which you further the causes that I think through history the Nobel Peace Prize has really prized, which is things like collaboration, openness to others, a world where we try to lift each other up. So, as you can probably realize from what I'm saying, I don't think there's a huge chance he'll get it, but I have no sway over that. And in one way, as much as I'm skeptical to much of what Donald Trump represents, I think that the fact that there are leaders around the world who are motivated by the Nobel Peace Prize, that's a good thing. If that makes them more willing to do things that serve the world and that create peace, yeah, that's a good thing.
So, you mentioned that this has happened in the past when a Nobel laureate actually gave away their prize. Why do you think this happened? As you said, Donald Trump has not done something out of the world or impacted lives in meaningful ways. So, why do you think this incident happened particularly?
Well, first, you don't give away the prize because you cannot, because the prize is personal. It belongs to the laureate. But you can give away the medal or the diploma. For instance, the Nobel laureate from Russia from 2021, editor Muratov of the Novaya Gazeta, he auctioned off his prize so that the proceeds could go to people who suffered in Ukraine. Fantastic. I think that's a way of handling it that shows that you are conscious about what you do with the rest of the world. I've seen many diplomas around the world that have been donated to museums instead of being in the home of the laureate. So that's not unusual in itself. When it comes to what you're looking for in a Nobel Prize laureate, I think it's someone who can also be looked up to, someone who represents ideals on behalf of humankind. And sometimes the Nobel Committee will choose someone who, in hindsight, doesn't quite seem to have lived up to that. We often have discussions, for instance, about one of the most controversial prizes ever, 1973, when Henrik Kissinger and Le Docteur got it, or what seemed to be a peace agreement in Vietnam. Didn't fully work out, and of course, Henrik Kissinger, a very, very controversial person. And that will happen from time to time, because it's hard to find someone who will stand the test of time fully, because things can happen after the prize has been awarded. In the case of Donald Trump, of course, he says that he's ended this many wars, he's contributed to this many peace agreements. Scholars say that that's, quite debatable. The point, nonetheless, that I often come back to is this someone who represents the Prize's ideals? But I'll add again, I leave it to the current committee to make that sort of decision. I think in many cases, in most cases, the Nobel Committee has made wise choices.
Right. And adding to that, I recently saw the presentation of Jared Kushner about the Peace Board. What do you think about that? I mean, galvanizing support from across the world, it seems like a business venture, right? And it's a bid to lobby for the Peace Prize. How do you perceive that? Has it ever been done before in the history? Or when you saw that, you were just like blown away? You said, yeah.
The basic idea of trying to get people together to plan long term in the Middle East, that's not a bad idea. The Middle East is incredibly complex, or as you often say here in Asia, West Asia, what we in Europe talk about as the Middle East. So that in itself, trying to think differently think outside the box, as we often say, about how you can achieve long-term peace between Israel and the countries around it, how you can create, I think we should, an independent Palestine, which is a good partner in the area, how you can rebuild Gaza after the terrible, terrible suffering that's been going on there, how we can secure Israel. All of these things are absolutely worthy things to think about. And if anyone has different ideas for, putting together a board that can help do this, fine with me. Why I'm skeptical to what we've talked about now is A, what you point out, that it seems to a large extent to be geared towards a sort of business venture, how we develop Gaza. Nothing wrong about that, but that's not necessarily what politics should be about. There are huge entrance fees to be part of this board. You have to pay so many millions of dollars from your country to be part of it. And it seems that quite a lot of the people who will be part of it, if this comes about, are people who are from rather authoritarian countries, which is why also you've seen quite a lot of skepticism from democratic countries to take part in this. But there's one more point. Namely, we shouldn't multiply institutions when we already have a lot of institutions in our world. Sure, there are lots of things about the United Nations that make us say they could do better, but we do have the United Nations as a framework. And I think we should work through that in a very multilateral way when we try to find future solutions for the Middle East. Right. Now, I won't say that Donald Trump is only doing this because he wants the Peace Prize. Maybe there are other people pushing for this. Jared Kushner is one person doing that. But to me, it doesn't come across as the sort of institution building that this area really needs. And I think if it becomes a sort of flashy thing, which is mostly about showing, here I am, look at what I'm doing, I don't think that necessarily helps the population of Gaza. And those are the people that we need to have in the back of our minds as we build a future peace in the Middle East.
Right. No, thank you so much for sharing.
And I'll add, not just the population of Gaza, this is also about Israel. And I know about Israel's security concerns, but this has to be done on a wide human level. It has to be about human security. It's not about some powerful people gathering in flashy meetings or donating billions of dollars to who knows exactly what.
So you were telling me about your visit to India this time, which has come after many years. And your last visit was when you were the head of the corporate governance at the Norges Bank Investment Management.
That's right.
The sovereign wealth fund of Norway.
Yeah.
So after many years of hiatus, you returned to India. Yeah. So what has struck you the most on this visit?
Well, friendliness, generosity, being able to be part of so many different and interesting groups. Thanks to your program, I've been able to speak to groups of students. My daughter is with me because we've written a book together. She's been around just today. She's been visiting a school, talking to the kids. We're meeting people who are advisors in the investment world and the government world. So that's the thing that always strikes one about India, a huge diversity in the positive sense. Such a huge country too, one of the, right now, the most populous country in the world. So those things always strike you when you come to India, whether it's now or whether it's, 15 years ago. But having said that, I think there is something right now about the political movement in the world where we need nations that are willing to work with others. And I think there are some immense opportunities for India right now. And it's interesting because right this week that we are together, right as we speak more or less, now I said it wrong, the India-EU trade agreement has just been signed. You use some big words, the mother of all deals, but it's really an important deal because it shows a willingness to collaborate. It's all about cooperation, about open and free trade, about learning from each other, and to actually have great power blocks in the world expressing that instead of anger, instead of a quest for conflict, instead of getting ready for war. That makes a deep impression. And it also is connected to my strong belief that India can be a really important diplomatic player in the years to come. Because India has a good relationship with what we broadly can call the West. It's a democracy. At the same time, it has a relationship to Russia, to China, and there are so many things in our world that we need to solve together. Climate change, regulation of artificial intelligence, space that I'm working on, space exploration, and how we actually utilize that for the good of the whole world. Who can bring parties together? Well, I think India is such a party. So these are among the things that strike me, in addition to, wonderful food, openness, friendliness. Of course, it's also a huge society in terms of challenges, as all countries have. We have challenges all over the world with integration, with working together in spite of religious and other differences. You have challenges with poverty, and these sorts of challenges are universal, but they have to be tackled locally. And I know, of course, that those challenges are there, but I also meet so many people who are not afraid to talk about those challenges. And that's something that's truly important. We have to be able to talk about it. I have a favorite saying from an American kids television host who was called Fred Rogers. He was just a fantastic storyteller. And he said, remember that everything mentionable is manageable. If you can talk about it, if we can actually have open fora where we're not afraid of each other, we can talk about difficult things. And I think that's the path ahead for the world. We must be able to talk in a measured, respectful way about difficult things.
No, you touch upon two very important topics about, the role India can play in the future of the global landscape of geopolitics, which everyone is talking about in the world, right? But then you also mentioned poverty as a big challenge that India faces, being the most populous country in the world. India is poised to become the fourth largest economy in the world in the next few months, whereas the unemployment is just growing year on year. What is your take on that?
Well, it's a very complex issue because this has to do with how we organize politics. It has to do with institutions. It obviously has to do with economics. How do we actually make sure that we have a society where people can actually live off what they do, that we have salaries that are just, and it has to do with education as well. How we actually educate young people so that they have the skills they need in order to enter the world of having a job, earning money, taking care of your family, all of those things. But if you look at it from a philosophical point of view, and after all, I am a philosopher, I think there are also certain concepts and ideas that we have to think about and that we have to reflect on their meaning. And one of the most important terms I know is dignity. If you look back at one of the most important documents of the modern era, namely the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, signed by, so to speak, all the countries of the world, that's where it starts. It starts with inherent human dignity, that all human beings have dignity. And I think in Indian philosophy, the sense of respect for nature, respect for what is living, I think the sense that living beings have dignity, so we have a responsibility towards each other. And that's obviously about human beings, but it's also about our place in the world. I think that's a point of departure that we need to reflect more on. And I think also there are possibilities there for cross-cultural dialogues. I come from a Christian background, and I think there is so much in the Christian message about the meaning of life, about the dignity of life, that speaks very well to the rich tradition, or I should say traditions, of the subcontinent. And I think that's one way of tackling, not tackling in the political sense, but tackling conceptually these sorts of issues. And it means, of course, we cannot live in a world where it's deep-seated injustice over long periods of time, because it's basically wrong. It's wrong that people don't have an opportunity to get education just because of where they live or their parents are poor. And I think addressing those things philosophically too is important because I also think it creates hope. It creates a sense that, yes, these are things we really believe in. They're not just political measures.
Right.
They're about meaning.
Yeah.
They're about dignity.
And also, with the most populous country, we're also the youngest country in the world, India. What are the key one or two things that you would say to the young people in India they have to keep in mind as they take center stage in politics, business, academia? What values should they carry in their career?
I think what we just talked about, dignity, is the name of such a value also because it talks to yourself as well. It's not just the others that have dignity. It's not just nature or our world. It's you. You are worth something. You make a difference. You are unique. And these things can sound like cliches, but they're not. So I think that sort of belief in yourself. And then I think for India specifically, there is a need to have two thoughts at the same time. On the one hand, pride in India, a young country, as you say, but also with an ages-old tradition, the most populous country in the world, a country that has so much to contribute, and a country that people are proud of. But at the same time, to be a humble representative in the world, to ask how can we serve the world through this? How can we serve each other? It's a diverse nation as well. How can we serve each other? And that sort of combination of pride and humility is one that I think is key to a great nation. And I think for young Indians today, wherever you are, whatever your career path will be, your family background is, what you want to do with your life, to think that, yes, I represent this. I represent something I'm proud of, but I also represent something that I'm humble about and something that can always be better. The day we think that we are where we should be, the day we say, oh, we are now good enough, that's when progress stops. That's when we are not hungry anymore, we're not curious anymore. So I truly believe in that, and I think that's important for each individual, whatever you face in life, also on a personal level, and obviously it's important for entrepreneurship and building of a strong economy.
You touch upon the sovereign wealth fund of Norway, and oftentimes the organization is a reflection of the leadership. So I had an opportunity to run into your friend Nikolai Tangen, who's the CEO of the sovereign wealth fund of Norway, a very unassuming man, just carrying his backpack around the World Economic Forum in Davos. On one side, this person manages the biggest fund in the world. And on the other side, I see many fund managers who are, so to say, full of themselves and pretty arrogant. Why the stark difference? Is it a thing in Norway that everyone is just humble and down to earth? Or, is it something very, particular about Norway and the education system wherein people actually end up becoming like this?
It's a very generous way of asking the question. To go to the individual that you're talking about, Nikolai happens to be an old friend of mine and a great leader for our Sovereign Wealth Fund. And it's true that he embodies a lot of those values of being quite egalitarian, treating people the same wherever they're from, curious, open, friendly. I think much of his success, both previously as a hedge fund manager, now as a government employee heading the Sovereign Wealth Fund, is something he carries with him. And I think people feel that. People feel his interest. And you know well as well, Archish, that sometimes we meet really great people. You and I are fortunate that sometimes we find ourselves in rooms with people who really make a difference. Who do you remember afterwards? Who do you learn from? Who do you look up to? That's exactly the people who manage to be on a basic human-friendly level. Whoever they talk with, that's the sort of people that make a deep impression. And I also think in times of crisis, those are the people who can keep their head, cold enough to tackle those crises because they know it's about human beings. They know it's about how I meet this as a human being, not as some high-flying bigwig. So stay grounded. I think that's something that we can always remind ourselves of. And I think it makes a huge difference in our world. When it comes to Norway specifically, we are a country that's very small. And we have our great problems too. We have potholes in the road, and we have corruption, and we have these things. So sometimes you hear sentences like, oh, it's a country of peace, and everything is so friendly. Yeah, we have our challenges. Obviously, we are quite fortunate because we are, materially speaking, quite a rich country. And with a smaller population and in a part of the world where you don't see a lot of natural disasters, we have it relatively easy. What I hope we have is, as a positive point, is a relatively egalitarian sort of societal structure, which means that distances aren't too big, by which I mean whether you're rich or not so rich or poor, you don't have this sense that people are far away. There's some elite far away somewhere ruling things. Of course, you have differences in Norway too. Of course, you have political debates about these things. But overall, a sense that, well, we're in the same boat, essentially. There's an old saying that if someone tells you we're in the same boat, their message is you should be rowing. So I'm not saying that's necessarily a perfect sort of thing to say if you're well off. But having said that, I think there's this sense. And then there are some coincidental things, like the fact that Alfred Nobel, who stood behind the Nobel Prize, was Swedish. And at the time he instituted the prize and wrote his will and died, Norway and Sweden were in a political union. And he chose that one of the Nobel Prizes should be handed out in Norway instead of Sweden. We don't really know why he decided that, because it just says so in his will. It's probably because he felt Norway was a little bit less powerful, being the junior partner in the union. We didn't have our own foreign policy. Maybe it would be less controversial that way. The point being that we haven't done anything great in order to deserve handing out the Peace Prize. It's more or less coincidental. But I think it does something to us if you try to think of yourself as a country that can serve others, hopefully, by contributing to peace. We have not always succeeded. Norway has been part of negotiation efforts that have not led to that much good. The Oslo Accords for the Middle East, for instance, which seemed absolutely fantastic at the time. Unfortunately, it turned out not to solve it. So I'm not saying we're doing everything right. And I must also emphasize the Nobel Committee is, of course, totally independent of the Norwegian government. So it's not as if we do what the government says. But nonetheless, I think you have a sort of self-image concentrated around being a servant and trying to contribute to peace. We don't always live up to that, but it's there. And hopefully that can make a difference of some kind, I'm hoping. But I'm very humble, and when you are in a country where you see up close all the challenges we have and you hear other people saying, oh, Norway, so fantastic, and you go, you should try living there. But we are happy. We are happy in Norway. Generally, we are. And, we have good skiing conditions during the winter. That's a good thing.
Yeah. No. So, Henrik, also, because you have been involved in investing, as I mentioned earlier, as the head of corporate governance, you do have an insider's view on how investing works very well. India is a hottest place right now in the world to attract capital. Whether it's from Japan, the US, Middle East, there's capital pouring in the public markets, FDI, startups. What are the couple of things you would say that the investors should keep in mind within India while they start backing companies and investing their money?
Firstly, thanks for your generosity. When I was head of corporate governance at the Sovereign Wealth Fund, it was primarily to work on ethical and social issues, meaning how do we take care of the good governance of companies. So I'm very careful with saying that I know the investment world very well. You know it better than I do. But of course, I observe it. It's a little bit like someone who's at a football game and watches the game and you feel that they know better than the football players what to do. Hey, kick the ball. No, they don't. But at the same time, as an observer, you can always have a bird's eye view and observe certain things. And in that sense, yes, there are things to look out for. First of all, of course, it's the danger of bubbles. It's the danger of a lot of money going the same way into things that aren't as solid as we think. And that's hard to know beforehand, but we've had bubbles bursting before.
Right.
So diversifying, making sure that not all your eggs are in the same basket. These are obvious rules that still apply. I think, secondly, it's thinking about how, as a custodian of other people's money, which essentially you are as an investor, you are very careful to think about your fiduciary duty, which is, of course, a legal term. But I'm not just thinking in legal terms. I'm thinking moral terms. Just imagine you have a friend who has something really valuable, like a really nice car, or maybe something even more valuable, like their kid. And they ask you to look after it. Could you please, look after my son today? You should feel this sense of, wow, I now have a responsibility to look after something that's really important. It's not always easy, but you really try because you realize this is not mine. I'm doing something for someone else. That's what an investor does. You take care of things, both in the sense of the money of the end owners, but also, of course, all those places you put those monies, all the companies you invest in, if it's in stocks, all the entities that you lend money to or from in the bond market. You have a responsibility towards all those institutions and all those people. And that injects a sense of humility. And I think there's always a danger, because if you do really well and you earn a lot of money, you suddenly feel like you own the world. And wow, aren't I great? I'm so rich. Well, remember, you're still a custodian. You're still someone taking care of things. Hopefully, in the wider sense, also for the next generation. And I think that's always something to learn.
So, Henrik, as we were talking about Donald Trump, the president of the US, he recently wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of Norway, which was in the news and talk of the town. So, can you please elaborate on the letter and your views on it?
It's interesting because many years ago, my father, rest in peace, he was Prime Minister of Norway too. So I've seen some of these things up close, by which I mean communication, political communication. And I think quite a lot of people are a bit shocked by the way in which Donald Trump communicates, because it seems to come unfiltered, off the cuff, ramblings late in the evening. And once again, I don't want to talk too much in a way that's very critical of others, but I think in the case of Donald Trump, these are things that are not really constructive. So what was the letter? The letter was, "You did not give me the Nobel Peace Prize." This is paraphrasing, but it was more or less what he said. And he said, "The Nobel Peace Prize is actually handed out in Norway, and the Norwegian government has a lot of say," he says. "And now I won't think that much about peace anymore because I'm angry." Once again, I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much the gist of it. Firstly, he knows, or at least should know, that this is wrong. I sat on the Nobel Committee for 6 years. We never received any instruction. I mean, they wouldn't dare or dream about doing that. There are some stories of the past where there have been signals sent, they say, but this is pretty much sacrosanct in Norway, that the Nobel Committee is independent of the Norwegian government, and it makes its decisions totally independently. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, of course, to be so self-centered that you are angry about not getting a prize, having results or consequences for world peace. We all know that the United States can play an important role constructively in the world. And he says that, well, I'm so angry I didn't get the prize. I don't think I'll think so much about peace anymore. Seems to me a very wrongful way of communicating, even if he doesn't mean it. It sends signals about personal pride, taking precedence over your duties as a political leader. And I think this is something to think about for all of us. How do we communicate when we are leaders? And I'm not just talking about prime ministers and presidents. It can be leader of your local housing association or the kindergarten, or it can be a leader, a CEO of an investment company. How do I communicate? How do I make other people understand what I'm after, but also how we can work best together? What are the goals we should set for ourselves in this world? John F. Kennedy said in his inaugural address, "Don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And I think you can make that into a global question in the sense of what can we contribute in our world that will make it a safer and better place. We need that, with all the challenges that we have. And that's why I think many people reacted to this letter. Of course, like so much in the world of Donald Trump, it's very quickly yesterday's news because so much is happening all the time. But I think we have to think about, all of us, what sort of communicative atmosphere we create. And of course, just what you and I are doing together here. You're fully free to ask me any question you like. You can ask critical questions. You can follow up and say, I don't agree with you. That's fine, because we feel safe together here. We know we wish each other well. And then you have an open space for criticism. Then you have an open space for disagreement. If instead you feel that you're all the time being criticized, it's always a barrage of angry words, I think we become defensive and we stop looking for common solutions. So communication, if it's anything that I've learned, if there is anything that I've learned in the course of my life, communication is important. The way you create a communicative atmosphere which is open, inviting, and which makes people want to say, hey, I have a say in this. I can contribute. That's what we need.
Henrik, is there something you want to add or you want to share with a lot of young people who are watching this show?
First of all, history has not been written. So when we live in challenging times like we do now, and we do, we see more armed conflicts around the world. We know how great of a challenge climate change is. We see leaders who are intent on conflict or self-enrichment. It's easy to think this is going the wrong way, but history has not been written yet. There is hope. I'm wearing a pin here right below my microphone that is from something I've done quite a lot of work on recently, because I've written about a book about space history, about the fact that human beings actually went to the moon in the 1960s and 1970s. And most people will know that that was a space race. It was the US versus the Soviet Union. It was something that came out of a power struggle, but it was also about exploration. It was also about all of humankind. And in 1967, it's the middle of the Cold War, it's the middle of the space race, the Soviet Union and the United States, together with Great Britain, sign, and they get the rest of the United Nations long after, the Outer Space Treaty, which says that space does not belong to any nation and we have to work together. It even says that those who travel into space are envoys on behalf of all humankind. Isn't that fantastic? And it shows that in the midst of what seems to be very conflictual, this is the time of the Vietnam War. The year after the Outer Space Treaty, there's the invasion of Czechoslovakia. This is a tough time for the world. There are also forces working on actually collaborating, actually creating peace. And that's this pin. It's from 1975. I mean, I'm sure the pin is newer, but it's from something that happened then. Namely, Apollo and Soyuz meeting in space, a collaborative, friendly space exploration mission where in orbit around the Earth, they do great science, but most of all, they meet in peace. And it happens a few weeks before the Helsinki Accords are signed, which is a unique agreement on how we can collaborate in Europe in spite of our ideological differences. What's my point to the young people? To all of us, there is hope. There is always possibility for collaboration. There are always things that we human beings can do together. But someone has to take the initiative. Someone has to believe in it. And I think that's linked to a very important virtue. I mean, a virtue is a character trait, right? It's something that characterizes you. And one of the virtues that I both admire and am inspired by more and more is the virtue of moderation, which is essentially the virtue that makes you think that I'm part of something bigger. There is something bigger. You can understand that religiously and spiritually. You can understand it in an interhuman sense. You can understand it as part of the world, part of something bigger. And that leads to another really important virtue, gratitude, which I feel right now. I mean, I can sit here and speak to a great friend about the important things. I'm grateful. There are so many challenges in the world. We know there are so many things that can make us sad, but in the midst of that, there are always things to be grateful for as well. And when you are grateful, I think that you do something to yourself. You create a sort of space for things that are good and hope for the future. So with moderation and gratitude and hope, and I think space is a great, field for that. It's a great topic because all astronauts and cosmonauts and environmonauts, as you say here in India, who have traveled out into space and see the Earth from the outside, they say you see the Earth differently because you see how common it is, how we have this together, how beautiful it is, how vulnerable it is. So I'm looking for those vantage points.
Wow. Henrik, thank you so much for your optimism and hope.
Thank you, Archish, for a great conversation.